All work in bad trains makes dark a dull boy. All work in bad trains makes dark a dull boy. All work in bad trains makes dark a dull boy. All work in bad trains makes dark a dull boy. All work in bad trains makes dark a dull boy. All work in bad trains makes dark a dull boy. All work in bad trains makes dark a dull boy. All work in bad trains makes dark a
The Thailand State Railways, CRRC CDA 5B1, or sometimes just called the Ultraman locomotives, due to their coloration resembling the Japanese superhero Ultraman, yet seemingly not being nearly as powerful, or at least, well, in practice. These are manufactured by a Chinese company, CRRC Kishuyan. I'm not sure how to say it. And these are very recent. The first 20 of them arrived just last year, in January 2022. They are considered a significant step up compared to the locomotives that Thailand had been using, which were starting to become very out of date. They have improved horsepower to 3,218, diesel electrics, with a maximum speed of 120 miles per hour. Thailand has very good hopes for these, but based on direct sources among my fan base, that doesn't seem to be entirely the case. Now, actual data on these in terms of their current reliability is very scant, I've found, at least on my end. Some countries are easier to research than others, and Thailand is one of the ones that makes it very hard for me. But I do have some residents of Thailand among my following, and they are the ones who specifically asked me to talk about them because they are not currently happy with them at all. Apparently in the first year of operation, they suffered multiple breakdowns while pulling passenger trains, which is really a bad sign, because passenger trains for these locomotives should be pretty easy, especially compared to the heavier freight, and yet they're consistently breaking down, which is bad. It's also hilarious because most of the articles I have found about them talk them up as a great thing for Thailand and how their test runs went perfectly. Everything is fine, absolutely. And yet in the first year they're breaking. That's not good. Now, to be fair, and this is the reason why I'm putting them low on the list, there is still time to fix these. It's only been a little over a year since they entered service, and teething troubles are not unheard of when it comes to a new locomotive. But, on the other hand, if you were to, say, purchase a car, and it kept breaking down within the first year of you having it, you would consider that a lemon. Like, that's not a good thing. It's bad. It's very bad. And I would understand if these were minor technical difficulties, but straight up breaking down? I mean, come on now. But again, it's early. So the verdict's still out on these. I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt, at least right now. But a few years down the road, if I'm still hearing bad things, well, I'll let you know. Bombardier's HR616 diesels. Bombardier made freight diesels? What? But yes, they did, in fact. And they didn't last very long at all. And they didn't do very well at all in terms of sales. They sold exactly 20, and no more. And the reason for that was, well, there were a few. For one thing, Bombardier had never done a diesel quite like this before or since. And the HR616 designation, well, the HR stood for high reliability. Marketing, everybody. And maybe in their heads they were going to be really reliable. I mean, they were using an Alco prime mover, the 251E, and they were 6-axle, 3,000 horsepower freight locomotives. And they did have some pretty decent technical innovations. For example, 2119 actually was the first diesel on the railway to feature a desktop-style control stand, but they lasted only a little over 10 years. And that was because, frankly, in operation, they just weren't that impressive. Apparently the high reliability thing was just marketing because they weren't that reliable. I mean, they weren't terrible, but the problem was, once they failed, fixing them was a technical nightmare, and that only inflated maintenance costs. Plus, competition was steep in the freight market. You had EMD and General Electric sitting around. Bombardier barely had a way in, and when one of their only attempts at it was not ideal at all, that kind of made it so that no one else was going to buy from them. Canadian National retired them by the end of the 1990s, with every single one being scrapped. The MR63. Man, I have gotten so many comments about this ever since my list of failed train modifications, because people were like, actually, Darkness, there is a rail line that does use rubber tires, and that's the Montreal Metro in the city of Montreal, Quebec. So, you're wrong about rubber tires not working. Yeah, take that. Well, first of all, I didn't say they never worked. In fact, I said the opposite. There were some benefits to them, but the maintenance never made sense, at least when you compared it to steel wheels. Now, the MR63s did have a pretty long life, working on the lines from 1966 until 2018, and they built 369 vehicles, 123 sets in 3-car formations, as well as 41 sets in complete 9-car formation. However, out of that, 0 are still in service, and only 1 was preserved. And yes, indeed, they do use a setup that utilizes rubber tires, which do have some benefits in terms of stopping time and overall traction and things like that. There are a few transit systems in the world that do utilize this setup. And some of those use a central rail, like the SUVs from Jurassic Park, to guide the train, where the tires run on basically just the ground like a normal car. And that seems to be easier on the rubber tires altogether, but the MR63 didn't work that way. It worked like a typical train. There were 2 rails. However, the MR63, as well as the Montreal Metro as a whole, is kind of an example of why this really is not a good idea. Even though they're still using it, and they built it, they might as well. The reliability of this setup is seriously questionable from a maintenance perspective. It still is. Reliability levels of the MR63s in particular were more than double that of typical North American subway cars, with normal steel wheels. More than double. And you have to remember, the entire Montreal Metro is underground. These trains do not have to deal with the weather at all. They're always underground, and still their maintenance costs are through the roof. The MR63s were notorious for this problem, and as they aged, obsolete components and parts availability meant they got even worse. Ride quality diminished very quickly as suspension systems and the rubber spring packs started to harden with age. Now, to be fair, they were getting very, very old, so I wouldn't necessarily ding that against them necessarily, and the rough riding was not attributed to the tires or the tracks, which were well maintained and regularly replaced. But do the costs justify it? If you ask Montreal, apparently yes, because they are still using this setup, and the whole reason they chose it is because of the benefits of rubber tires. The stop time is shortened, and they can go a little faster. But how worth it is it with how much money you're sinking into it? That's kind of my question. And it doesn't seem like I'm ever going to get a solid answer on this. Some are going to point out in the comments that, hey, I don't think these trains are that bad. And maybe you're right. They have gotten significant use, but that seems to be more out of stubbornness than anything. Personally, whenever I hear maintenance costs, the last thing I want to hear next to it is more than double everyone else. But if Montreal can afford it and wants to pay for it, that's on them. I guess they are kind of neat. The Indonesian SS1000 class. Ooh, I'm knocking 2 things off the list here for this, because to date I am still harassed by the Dutch, and lately, the thing they've been saying a lot is Werksvoer, which is their historical locomotive manufacturer. I also have some Indonesian fans who want me to talk about this particular locomotive, and good news! This is a locomotive that ran in Indonesia, but it was built by Werksvoer! Haha, there you go, Dutch! I hope you like what I'm about to say about you. Alright, so what was wrong with these? Well, on paper, it should have been nothing. They were Pacifics, but they were designed to replace the preceding Pacifics that couldn't keep up with increasing demands. So Stadspoorwegen ordered new ones that were supposed to be more powerful, built by Werksvoer. The unique thing about these Pacifics is that they were 4-cylinder, compound designs, which is really unusual for Pacifics. When you hear 4 cylinders and compound, you think of a Malay, but that's not what these were. So the setup was quite bizarre, and they had superheaters, piston valves, and feed water heaters, making them fairly modern for 1920. The problem was that Werksvoer had never built anything like these ever before, and decided to use Indonesia as a bit of a guinea pig for testing this whole setup. As it turned out, while on paper they probably should have been pretty good, if you ask the actual Indonesians, no, that's not what happened. Apparently the 4-cylinder compound setup was not done very well, at least in this case. Maintenance on them was a Christmas nightmare due to that, and they did not pull nearly as well as the preceding class of Pacifics, even though, again, on paper, they absolutely should have been able to do that. Many trains had to be double-headed as a result of this, which is like the opposite of what they were supposed to do. The frustrating part about this for Indonesia, because they were considered a Dutch colony at this time, which is why they had to deal with Works 4, they didn't have a lot of say in what locomotives they received, so they were kind of stuck with them. Which is why they continued using them so long, because even though they were a complete pain in the butt, they did function, technically, just not as well as they were supposed to. They actually stuck around through World War II, even to the Japanese occupation. The Japanese redesignated them C-53s, and some of them apparently still operated even into the early 1970s. And though solid data is very limited in terms of what happened to them, I believe at least one is in preservation, C-5317, which has at least 2 recent color pictures of her. So, hey, that's something. Are you happy now, Dutch? I talked about Works 4. I also talked about, like, one of the worst steam engines they ever made. You're welcome, by the way! I hope you spam my Discord more for this, because this is what you get whenever you do that. The British Rail Class D2/1. I would ask that you all excuse me for just a moment. Alright, now that I got that out of the way, let's discuss the D2/1, because in my video about the North British Locomotive Company, I brought them up and said they were bad, but I didn't go into detail, and when I did that I realized, oh no, I have no other option but to actually make a video involving these and go into some level of detail. But truth be told, there isn't that much information, because it didn't last very long. NBL only built 8 of them, and they were all withdrawn between 1963 and 1968. Every single one was scrapped. But why were they withdrawn like that? Well, there were 2 main reasons why these were bad. One wasn't exactly their fault. It was just because British Rail had ordered too many shunters. They had so many different classes of shunters, just all over the place. They had over 900 08s. Why? Why did you need that many? They didn't. They absolutely didn't. And there was no point to using these when they had so many others, especially ones that worked better and were standard. These were diesel hydraulic, not diesel electric. And British Rail would eventually settle on the standard of diesel electric. But that wasn't their major problem. The problem isn't brought up directly in most articles about it because, again, information is scant. I feel like a lot of the locomotives on this list were like that. You guys made this one really hard for me. I actually had to work for this, so thank you for that. Now, the main problem with these is that they used Paxman engines. Now, Paxman is a diesel engine manufacturer, and some of the engines they made were actually pretty good. But the design they were using for this particular locomotive was, not. For reference, the D2/1s shared the RP engine with the Fell diesel, the British Rail 10800, the British Rail Class 07, and the New South Wales Government Railways 41 class. If any of those sound familiar to the more astute among you, it's because every single one of them has appeared on previous installations of Worst Trains Ever because they were all terrible because the engines were trash! The RP engines were not good at all, and I assure you they weren't any better in the D2/1s. They were absolutely atrocious, completely unreliable, and failed constantly. So even if the D2/1s were standard, utilizing them was not a good idea. And as I said, they were all scrapped. Although, weirdly, River Eden, which is a shunter at RAF Luchars, which I'm hopefully pronouncing correctly, was built to the same specification as the D2/1 and is preserved. While she isn't technically a D2/1, she is nearly identical, I guess with improvements to the engine to make her actually work, which is probably helpful. Thank you for that. Wow, I just can't believe you. Why would you do this to me? Why? I thought you were gone. I really thought I was done, and yet here we are. You're welcome. And with that, a special thank you to all my underwater train finders. Some Dude 267, Orange Glass, Benjamin Owens, Panzer Kitson 131 Just 232, Josh Johnson Metal for Life, Guy Anzac 81, Arthur Roy, Tommy Rossini, Lord Captain Von Thrust III, Joshua Long, Brian, Jack Carson's Row of Videos, Hayden DeGrow, Master of None, Dr. Racer 78, Lord Hoth 444, Alaric Jaspers, The Baxter, That Guy with a Beard, Mark Holding, Lock Kraken, Murder Drones Doll, A Person 723, DM Trouble Typhoon, Ohio Trucker 1, Hendrick Motorsports Fan 5, Alfonso Lapuche, Royal Hudson 2860, and Isofer 1405. Till next time, this is Darkness, and please don't ask me to talk about bad locomotives anymore. Also, a fond farewell.